Hello. So in part one of this screencast, we looked at how there are five assumptions that must be met for a population to be at Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And if we deviate from any one of those five assumptions, then evolution will happen. So we started listing our five assumptions and then listing the mechanism of evolution that occurs when that assumption is not met. So assumption one is no natural selection. So the mechanism of evolution is natural selection. And then in a major shocker plot twist, we realize that natural selection is not the only mechanism of evolution. Our second assumption is no mutation, and so our mechanism of evolution would be mutation, because just like natural selection changes gene frequencies over generations, making certain traits more common or less common, so too can mutation change gene frequencies by creating new alleles or sort of disrupting older ones. So our third assumption is isolation from other populations, meaning that there's nobody coming in and nobody going out. We're just completely isolated population. And so our mechanism of evolution is gene flow. And gene flow simply means the entry or exit of alleles due to immigration or emigration. In other words, alleles are flowing in or flowing out of that population. Can you even see my hand? There it is, flowing in and out. And so a very, very simplified example would be if you have this sort of population of green beetles in one area, a population of brown beetles in another, and then all of a sudden one of these brown ones migrates over. You have just changed the gene frequency of this population by adding a brown allele. It used to be 100% green, now it's not 100% green. A little bit more realistic example would be deer. Here you've got a mountain range and there's a pass where deer can sort of pass through periodically. And so maybe you mostly have these isolated populations, but there's a little bit of gene flow as the deer pass back and forth here. Humans, sometimes students ask, hey, are humans still evolving or is this it? And the answer is, yeah, we are absolutely still evolving, but maybe not in the way that people want to think about. It's not like we're going to have wings or anything like that tomorrow. But for sure, gene frequencies are changing, and a major source of that happening in humans is gene flow. And the United States is a great example of that, where people from all over the world are immigrating into the United States. And so new combinations of genes are being mixed together. And so, whereas just, a few thousand years ago, that would have been unheard of. If you were in Australia, you're staying there. And if you're in Europe, you're staying there. And now you can hop a plane and boom, instantly you're back to any other part of the world you want to be. So our fourth assumption of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is random mating. What that means is that basically partners it's kind of inappropriate actually, just random hookups, I guess. Just, individuals just kind of randomly connecting and mating. You would think, wait, what? And that is very creepy when you think of it in the context of humans. But if you think about plants, for example, where a plant will just kind of put pollen out into the air and the pollen scatters around and lands on another flower, that is certainly random mating. So it's a little less creepy if you think about it in terms of plants or fungi or things like that. So the mechanism of evolution then is non-random mating. So non-random mating can take a couple forms. One is inbreeding. So I think you've probably heard of inbreeding and kind of inherently know that's bad. What is it though? Like, what is inbreeding? So inbreeding is where individuals mate with close relatives. And so why would that be a bad thing? Obviously, it's a little creepy and weird, but from a genetic point of view, why might that be problematic? Well, what happens is it increases the frequency of homozygotes. So, just a few generations ago, people would marry their cousins fairly regularly, I think. And so you'd be more likely to share similar genetics with them. And so if you have a rare recessive trait, and they have a rare recessive trait, then because they're in your same family, then it's more likely that those two rare recessives would come together and create a homozygous recessive individual. And sometimes rare recessive traits are harmful, and that's why they're rare, and they've They're recessive, so they've been hiding from natural selection, but all of a sudden you bring them together. So inbreeding can sort of bring these rare traits together, which can sometimes be problematic. So a lot of royal families had health and fertility issues that may have stemmed from generations of inbreeding. And so you can kind of see like, there's kind of a uncle niece thing going on here. We've got cousins, we've got second cousins. There's a lot of strange interactions here. Happening. And so, there's instances where hemophilia ran through one, was it this one? I don't even know which royal family it was, but hemophilia ran through a family. It's a rare disease, it's recessive, but because of all the inbreeding, it gave that recessive trait an opportunity to become homozygous, and so a fair number of people in that family suffered from hemophilia. So there's lots of cases of that. A little bit more relevant to today's world, where marrying your cousin is generally frowned upon, is in animals. So a lot of dog breeds. So, you may have heard of a purebred dog, and for some reason we think that's like a really good thing. But in reality, it's actually not the best. A purebred is going to ensure that they have particular traits, but it also means that there's a lot of inbreeding going on, where you have just a small pool of individuals mating to make sure that you keep the look and personality of that dog identical. And so as a result, a lot of purebred breeds have common health issues. So here's a little fun quiz. Name that health issue. Here are some dog breeds: Dalmatians, Cocker Spaniels, Poodles. Do you know what issues these breeds tend to have? Watch this. Boom, here it comes. There you go. So, Golden Retrievers tend to have hip problems. Cocker Spaniels tend to have retinal degeneration. My aunt and uncle had 2 Cocker Spaniels, both of whom went blind. So there's lots of issues that come from that heavy inbreeding. So go buy a mutt at the Humane Society, huh? All right. Another way that non-random mating can play out, not just inbreeding, but another way is sexual selection. Sexual selection is a lot like natural selection, but instead of nature sort of selecting for traits that helps the individual survive and pass on their genes, sexual selection is selection for traits, oftentimes due to female preference, that help an individual find a mate. So there are some great examples of this in nature, and I would really encourage you to watch these videos. They're really pretty interesting. One way sexual selection can play out is by males fighting with one another. And so elephant seals are these huge, like 2,000-pound males who would fight for dominance on a beach. And they would like whack each other with their heads and are very aggressive with one another and fight bloody, violent battles. And the winner is then able to sort of control that territory, and then has mating rights to all the females in that area. And I remember telling lady friend about that, and I'm like, and the winner like gets to mate with all the females in that entire area. So it's like this huge selective pressure to be that guy. And she just looked at me, she's like, it wouldn't be you, which I thought was pretty hilarious. Anyway, so, if you can win that battle, you get to pass your genetic material on to all of these females. And so there's huge incentive to be bigger and stronger and more aggressive, and that is what's happened here. Darwin beetle, that's these guys. They use these claws to like throw each other out of trees, which is kind of interesting. So I'll let you watch that clip. The bighorn sheep ramming into each other. Those are the males fighting for mates. So this happens a lot in nature. In addition to males fighting with one another and therefore getting traits that help them be better at fighting, sometimes sexual selection can result from males trying to attract a mate. And so the peacock is sort of the classic example of that. The male peacock does not fight in a brutish battle. No, the male peacock struts his feathers. He's like, showing off the feathers. And there's been research shown, this is a really good video clip. They're all really good in this section. Video clip that kind of shows they did an experiment, and they actually trimmed the feathers from males, and then found out that that the females were not digging those guys as much. And so they had, I believe they put it as a lonely mating season for these males. And so that bright feather is selected for. And what that bright feather is showing, it's not just, oh, it's pretty, but that bright feather is actually communicating real information to the female. It's saying, check this out. I'm carrying around these huge, ridiculous, brightly colored feathers that make me stand out I haven't been picked off by a predator. Parasites haven't like destroyed the look of me. So I must be pretty strong and tough and clean of disease. I've got good genes, mate with me. That's kind of what it's showing. Bowerbirds are one of my favorites. These guys actually produce these elaborate structures, and then the females kind of check it out, and if she likes what she sees, then she will mate with the male there. And these structures, you just got to watch it. I mean, it's crazy. There's bowerbirds that collect only blue items because blue is rare in nature. So if a male can gather lots of blue, that must mean he's pretty, pretty good guy, good genes. Birds of paradise do these crazy dances. Um, all of this is to sort of advertise fitness. Oh dear, to the female. Um, well worth watching all these videos. So sexual selection oftentimes results in what we call sexual dimorphism, where there's a difference between the male and female in terms of physical appearance. And pardon me while I plug in. I could just pause it, I suppose. There is a pause button on this, but I thought you guys would want to be part of this moment here. Okay, so I'm paused in. I'm sitting by the window. Okay. All right. So males and females look different. Again, antlers in the males so they can fight. Giant elephant seal so they can fight. Pretty wren, pretty duck, pretty peacock so they can, show off their health and fitness. Um, do humans do this? Well, probably. Obviously, men will clean the apartment or bring flowers or things to impress women. Men and women will maybe disguise themselves with perfumes or Axe body spray or whatever it is to kind of draw the other partner in. So for sure. And here's a really fascinating experiment where they had women rate men based on a t-shirt they wore. They just smelled a t-shirt that a guy had worn and rated the attractiveness based on that. So I'll let you click on that video to figure out what the heck that's all about. Very interesting stuff. Okay. Our final mechanism of evolution is genetic drift. The assumption is a very large population size. Genetic drift is where a chance event can cause allele frequencies to change. The best way to think about genetic drift is just with a coin flip, right? So we know that if you flip a coin 1,000,000 times, you're going to get about a 50-50 ratio of heads to tails. But if you flip a coin 10 times, you might be off a little bit, and that's because of random chance. So genetic drift certainly plays a role in which gene is passed on, right? It could be the big Y or it could be the little y. It's random. So if you have a really small population, the random passing of big Y versus little y can make a difference. So that's kind of what this is showing. If you have a really small population of flowers and there's just a handful of white ones, but only 2 manage to successfully pass on their genetic material, the 2 that are boxed, well, by random chance, these white ones didn't pass on their genes and the white allele is lost. So that's like a genetic drift. 2 examples of this. One, the bottleneck effect. This is kind of a specific case of genetic drift where there's some disaster that occurs. So you have this original population. You can see there's like a handful of yellow balls in there. But then a lot of individuals die. Only a small number actually make it through the, quote, bottleneck. And just by random chance, the yellow ones didn't make it. And so we've lost that genetic material forever. Cheetahs are a great example of this. They were hunted to near extinction in the 19th century. And even though they've rebounded in population numbers, a lot of the genetic variation that was killed off in the 19th century was lost when they passed through that bottleneck. And so even if we can save endangered species, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of the genetic diversity already. It's kind of a downer. Another example is the founder effect, where a few individuals become isolated from a population and start a new population, and their gene frequencies set the foundation for that new population. So let's suppose you have an initial population where almost everybody's big A, right? But you got one person with big A, little a. Well, if that one happens to leave and establish a new population somewhere else, that little a allele is going to be much more common in the new population. An example of this is in the Amish population. About 200 individuals left in the 1700s. They left Europe, arrived in Pennsylvania, and established a new population in the United States, and they've been a relatively isolated population ever since. Well, one of those individuals had this extra digit on their finger, And as a result, that is a very common trait among the Amish today. It's because it was a founder effect. That one person became the foundation for this whole population. Finally, great video clip. Encourage you to watch it, and I'm out of time. Thanks.